What's up, buddy?
Me barely.
Yeah. Well, thanks for putting me onto the Lars thing. That was cool.
That was great, timely, perfect. I just sent out an alert where I forgot to update the subject line and misspelled breaks. So
Happens.
is that what's going on around here?
All right. Well, yeah, I will avoid ask. Well, yeah, I won't. I know you can't get into a lot of the legal stuff, but we'll just talk in general about what's going on and how this is affecting everything. So I'll do a quick intro and then I'll bring you back in. Okay.
Ready when you are.
Okay. Good. Stand by. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's Observe and Report podcast. It is your boy, Atypical Security Guard, Damian Bunting, here on the Security Guard channel. Today, we're going to be talking to Kevin Starrett. He is the president of the Oregon Firearms Federation. And we have a lot to talk about. Measure 114. Measure 114, the anti-gun legislation here in Oregon that has unfortunately passed. What does that mean for Oregon? What does it mean for 2A advocates? And today we'll be talking about what that means for security guards. We're going to bring Kevin into the stream. Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Damien.
Yeah, always a pleasure to talk to you. Wish we were talking under different circumstances. You know, we have been kind of in front of the fight here, going up against the opposition of Measure 114. We're about 2 weeks removed from its passing, very narrowly. I think it was 49 point some odd to a 51% passage, with most of the passing votes coming from Multnomah County. For those of you who are not here in Oregon, Multnomah County encompasses all of Portland and the surrounding areas. That is, unfortunately, the voting block that pretty much dictates what happens here in all of Oregon. Kevin, if you can just kind of give everybody a brief summary of where we are currently in terms of 114 and what that means for us, we'll turn the stage over to you.
Sure. So the measure passes, and what that means is that as of December 8th, well, and December 8th being kind of an odd date, the Constitution says that ballot measures go into effect 30 days after they're certified by the voters. Well, they're still counting votes in many counties around the state. So how they could say it's been certified by the voters escapes me. But the Secretary of State said, well, it's going to be 30 days from November 7th. So December 8th, gun stores can no longer sell guns. If you're in possession of a standard capacity magazine, you are in violation of the law. And that if you're a police officer and you're off duty, that applies to you. If you're a security guard, that applies to you too. It's far worse than most people know, because while a lot of people think that you can keep the magazines you already own, the fact is, if you actually read the measure carefully, one of the things it says is that you can only have them on your own property. But more than that, it says they have to be on the property of, quote, the registered owner. Well, as you know, we don't register magazines. There's no way to register a magazine. There's no provision or possibility of doing it. So we don't have any idea what that's supposed to mean. In addition to that, if you are in possession of the magazines, you can be arrested anyway, because it's your job to prove that you had them prior to this going into effect. And a lot of people think that they can prove that with a receipt or, say, a dated digital photograph. That's impossible, because magazines all look alike. So if you took a magazine and photographed it, it's completely indistinguishable from any magazine that you buy subsequently. So you can't prove when you actually took possession of that magazine. And because the measure calls for what they call an affirmative defense, you're not innocent until they prove you guilty. You basically have to admit guilt and then say, I have an excuse. So there's really no way to possibly comply with this. And of course, with the accelerated date, go ahead, Damien.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I wanted to interject here. You know, this is the unfortunate reality of people not wanting to get involved in politics. I'm going to go on a very quick tangent here. You know, so many people, specifically in the security world and in the 2A advocacy world, anyone that's a concealed carry holder, anyone that owns a firearm, you are a part of the 2A community, whether you realize that or not. I've spoken to so many people over the last 2 weeks, and their attitude is so naive to the situation that we're in. You don't get to a point of anti-gun legislation being brought to the ballot and placed before people in order for it to be voted on and then certified and ratified into law without there being some nefarious interest behind that, right? And so many people that I've talked to in gun stores and on the streets, they're under this misconception that people are going to do the right thing. And when I say people, I mean the government. I just had a conversation with someone in the security world who said, "Well, I've talked to some people in the Portland Police Bureau, and they have assured me that they're not going to be checking for magazine capacity for security guards who are on duty." I've had other people who have said, I've talked to sheriffs who have assured me that this is not something that they're looking for and that they're not going to be actively prosecuting people for violating magazine capacity limits. And my question to both of them was, this situation specifically here in Portland has become such a hot topic. I know that you and myself as well, we have been reaching out to news organizations, to the local newspapers, to so many of the people in the media, the mainstream media, over the last 6 to 7 months, trying to get in front of this and have these conversations. Most of the mainstream media would not talk to anyone who was on the pro side of the Second Amendment. If you were a part of Lift Every Voice Oregon or any of these anti gun groups, they were getting a ton of airtime. But people who wanted to speak out against 114 weren't being given as much airtime. I know that you had a couple of conversations and interviews, but in terms of the scale imbalance in terms of the people who were against gun rights, they were getting a lot more coverage. I say that to say this: if someone specifically in the security world or a person that carries a firearm for personal protection under the concealed handgun license, if you're involved in a situation where you have to discharge that weapon, a lot of these things are now out of your hands. That magazine is against the law if it's over that magazine capacity limit. And now, with everything being so polarized, everything being so political and being so inflamed in terms of the media coverage of the aftermath of 114, we cannot place our livelihood, we cannot place our freedom, we can't place our financial stability in the hands of law enforcement officers or sheriffs who've said that they're not going to do something to us based on violating that magazine capacity limit. This is where I think a lot of people weren't really informed and understand the detriment that a lot of us pro 2A people who carry firearms and own firearms, if you find yourself in a situation where you have to use your firearm, some of this stuff is going to be out of our hands. And I don't think that people are being genuine or understanding the dire straits that we're in, those people that are carrying firearms right now.
It's not just out of our hands, it's out of the hands of the cops too. There are a lot of sheriffs who said flat out, I will not enforce the magazine ban, period. Then there's a lot of sheriffs who said, well, it's not our priority. But as you just pointed out, if they're involved in a situation where someone's committed a violent crime or somebody has used a firearm defensively and is charged and prosecuted by a hostile DA, what the sheriff's priorities are don't matter. If you defended yourself or you've used a firearm in the course of your business, you'll almost certainly be charged with a crime. If you're in Multnomah County, you have an extremely hostile DA. If you're in Deschutes County, you have an extremely hostile DA. So now those people will certainly use the possession of those magazines against you. And what you pointed out about people paying attention and being involved in the process, I probably got during the campaign probably half a dozen emails from people who didn't know how to vote against it. They didn't know that they were supposed to get a ballot in the mail. They didn't, which means to me they probably weren't registered to vote. They had no idea. I got an email and a phone call from a woman who was outraged that this had passed and had no idea that it had happened or why, because she said, I don't watch the news. And so while I understand people who want to tune out after the last 3 or 4 years of what's going on in this country and this state, you don't really have that luxury because people are making the rules for you. And now what we're facing are a bunch of faux Christians or other religious people in Portland who got millions from out of state and said, we're going to shut down hundreds of businesses in this state. That's their problem. And, in addition to the media, the media certainly reaches out to us as an organization, but it's utterly pointless to talk to them because they will never run anything relevant. If you try to point out what is actually in the measure, they simply will not run that. And both the media and the proponents of this measure are regularly, systematically lying about what's in it. I just watched a clip of an interview with one of the sponsors of the menu, this pastor or whatever he claims to be in Portland, saying, we reached out to gun groups, we reached out to hunters. I can't name any names. Well, they didn't reach out to any hunters I know. They didn't reach out to any gun owners I know. They certainly didn't reach out to any pro-gun organizations. But now, in addition to lying about what they were doing going in, now they're lying about what the effects are. So the fact is, the ballot measure takes effect December 8th. They're claiming it won't take effect until the police make up some rules. But the Attorney General says exactly the opposite. The Attorney General says, we don't care what the election date was. We don't care, or rather what the certification date was. It's going into effect December 8th. They lie about how it's going to be implemented. So they say, not a problem. The measure has an equity committee. That's not true. There's no equity committee built into the measure. Or while some of them are saying it won't go into effect, like Adam Johnson of that group says it won't go into effect, another one of their spokespeople, who is that, Elizabeth McCann, said, well, we expect the police to figure all this out, in spite of the fact that there's no mechanism for them to figure it out. So there's no possible way to comply with it. And as it's obviously a very dangerous thing for people who are trying to acquire a firearm to protect themselves and their family, but it also crushes hundreds of small businesses, which means those people are out of work, their employees are out of work. That's a hell of a Christmas present that these fake religious people in Portland brought to everybody. And as for security guards, it's exactly the same problem.
I think that that's an important thing to get across to people. So many people at the gun stores, they were saying, listen, this is going to be overturned. The Bruin case has already gone through. There's no way that this is going to stand up. And it's like, yes, eventually it will be overturned. But the point for Moms Demand Action, for Mayor Bloomberg, for Everytown or whatever that organization is called, for Lift Every Voice Oregon, they know that under the Constitution, they cannot truly take out the Second Amendment. But what they can do is they can cripple the industry, right? This is a de facto gun ban because there's no infrastructure, because they've set a bar so high that no one can get over it. Then all gun sales essentially will stop December 8th. And what they're banking on is that, multiple mom and pop gun stores will go out of business, that people that are working within the gun industry here in Oregon will be taken out of business, that this will have an effect on people across the board who potentially might purchase a firearm. They will see the requirements, they'll see the redundancy, they'll see the difficulty, and they'll say, you know what, it's just not worth it. I had a friend who just got his concealed carry license 2 weeks ago, and when we were talking about Measure 114, we were talking about the process of potentially purchasing a firearm now, but maybe that firearm would be caught up in the system, and he would have to wait X amount of weeks, and God knows if this thing goes into effect on the 8th, what that's going to do to his ability to get that firearm. All of this stuff, the politics that goes along with being a gun owner. And what he said to me was, it's just not worth it. And that broke my heart because it is worth it. We're talking about his personal safety in a city that has literally opened the doors to common criminals, to drug addicts, to the homeless, to people that are hell-bent on destruction. They've rolled out the red carpet. And here is a hardworking, tax-paying, 25-year-old that has done nothing wrong in his life. And he's taken the stance that his personal protection is simply not worth it because of all of the hoops that he potentially has to jump through. And that is the absolute goal of these anti-gun groups, is to make things so difficult that hardworking, red-blooded Americans say, you know what, it's just not worth it. And that's absolutely heartbreaking to me.
It's going to get infinitely worse, particularly for people in your line of work, but for everybody, because in addition to this ballot measure, Oregonians, well, Portland residents just passed a ballot measure that basically said the state is required to provide free health care without saying who's supposed to pay for it, which means, of course, that our state will be flooded with people, probably a lot of drug addicts looking for free medical care. There's no money to pay for it. And the measure also says this money can't come away from schools. So where does it come from? In addition to adding people who are likely to be engaged in criminal activity, the money can't come from schools. So who's left? Fire, police, and roads. So police will be further devastated. But the people who have been, say, in the gun store saying this will be overturned, well, yeah, they're right. It will be overturned. But the case that they keep referring to in New York, the Bruin decision, it took 5 years to get that overturned. And nothing gets overturned immediately. As of now, our organization is the only one that's filed anything. We're trying to get this done as quickly as possible because December 8th rolls around and those people are going to be, many of them will just be out of business. Some of them think they can survive a few months. I think that's really a tough call. But the fact is that this idea that it's going to be overturned is really naive because it could literally take years. If we're successful, what we will get is a temporary stay. It doesn't mean that the law will go away. So this could go on for quite a long time. If the legislature gets involved, which it certainly will, I guarantee you that a Democrat-controlled legislature where most of the people there are very, very anti-gun, they're not going to make it better. They may include a carve-out for police. They may include a carve-out where they eliminate the ban on shotguns to hopefully weed off people they think are just hunters and break up the opposition. But they're going to love the whole permit system, and they're going to love the idea that you can't have a magazine. So when they get involved, I think things will get much worse. So yeah, I'm confident that we're going to win. It is going to be a long battle, and it's going to cost way more than anything we've tried to fight in the past. So if people are content saying, oh, the courts will throw it out, they don't really understand how things work in courts. The courts don't just throw things out. You've got to go there and make a case for it.
Yeah. Kevin, we're able to sit here and we can talk about what should have happened, what we think could have happened, but here's where we are. And my question to you is, for the people on our side of this situation, what do we do? What are 3 actionable things right now that we need to be doing to help alleviate where we are and get through this?
Okay, well, anyone who's followed our organization for the last 25 or so years knows that our emphasis has always been on getting people to be active in terms of interacting with their legislators, leaning on them to do the right thing. We have never been an organization that sent out a request for money every day saying the sky is falling and we'll fix it. Now the sky is falling. And unfortunately, because it's in the courts, activism with your legislators is going to be a very secondary issue. It's going to be important. I'll explain that in a minute, but it's secondary. Right now, all this is about, for better or worse, is paying lawyers. That's all it's about. And the bills have already started coming in, and they can be quite staggering. So, donating to the legal fund is the job one. The second job would be to let other people know exactly what the magnitude and the ramifications of this measure are and how it will affect people, even people who are not gun owners. It will affect them in terms of limited police protection and all the other concerns that the sheriffs have had. And finally, as far as our legislators are concerned, I've received a number of communications from people who are outraged at the politicians who did this. Even some organizations are selling them. The politicians actually didn't do this. The people did this. Some people in Portland got several $1 million from the wife of a Microsoft executive, from the Oregon Education Association, from the National Education Association, and from some other high bucks people, and gathered signatures by paying a firm called Osprey Field Services to gather signatures under false pretenses. They lied to people who were signing the petitions, and they got it passed. But because it's such a mess, even the proponents of it, who've kind of admitted it's a piece of garbage, expect the legislature is going to have to go in there and make some changes as to how it actually gets implemented. When that happens, which could theoretically happen before the next legislative session starts, because that starts January 17th, which is way too late for them to do anything about this right away. They could theoretically call a special session. That would be difficult, but it's possible. I do know that the state police are talking to the legislature about a special session. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. In any event, once that happens, then it's in the hands of elected officials who are accountable. And then the people have the ability to tell those elected officials, they could throw the whole thing out. To say to those people, we fully expect you to do the right thing and end all the threats that this thing creates, end all the chaos and the destruction. As a ballot measure, you can't hold anyone accountable because you have supposedly the people voted for it. As soon as it gets into the hands of the legislature, then those people have the obligation to fix it. Now, I wouldn't want to be tasked with trying to fix this mess, so I would just throw it out. But as soon as that happens, and it will, then people need to talk to their legislators, and they need to know who their legislators are. And very often, you talk to people, they have no idea who represents them. They don't understand the difference between who represents them in the state in Salem versus who represents them in Washington. And those are things you need to know. Those are things you need to be aware of, because the fact is those people are making the rules for you, whether you like it or not. So those are the things that people can do. Spread awareness of the danger, let people know what we're doing so that we can increase the funding we have to pay for all these lawyers, and then start leaning on the politicians right now to say, look, this is coming your way and we expect you to fix this.
Oh, man, I tell you, it's frustrating. It's so frustrating because, I, as well as you, are completely aware of the opposition that we're up against here. One of the things that I keep racking my brain on, Kevin, is how do we get to a place where we can start to have conversations about the Second Amendment, about the ownership of firearms, the necessity of firearms. I feel like we have two completely opposing sides. We have the anti-gun group that doesn't want to hear anything about the situations that are important in terms of either the Constitution or people who are just aware of the need for their personal protection. And then on the pro 2A side, we have people that do not want to have any conversation on any sort of regulation, any sort of changes to our rights. And I feel like we end up in a situation like this where outside agitators come into our state and provide a solution from their perspective, and we end up in a situation like this. We are in a very liberal state. We are in a very liberal city, and we have people that are extremely anti-gun. Is there any way that you see where there can be any sort of moving to the middle from both sides, the far left, the far right, the anti-gun group people, the pro 2A people? Is there any way to find a middle ground? Because 114 has exposed that there are way more people in the state of Oregon that are pro Second Amendment in terms of just being able to purchase a firearm. I think that this measure has created a much larger demographic of gun owners than maybe we had going in. But we're going to have to find some way to either sway people who currently are completely anti-gun or find a way to work with people in the middle. Do you see any way that that's a viable option moving forward?
Well, first, I would disagree that it's an issue of far right versus far left, because if you look at even in the voters' guide, the Socialist Rifle Club came out against this measure. The Multnomah County Democrat Party refused to endorse it, and I got a lot of help from a liberal Democrat who was very pro-gun, who did everything he can to oppose this measure. So it isn't really that. I think it's more a matter of people who are rational versus people who have pathologies. As far as meeting in the middle, I would say if you look at, obviously this is a debate I've been in for a very long time, and the debate went on long before I was involved in it. But if you look at it, my position is the Second Amendment guarantees something in the Constitution, a right that was given to us by our Creator, which is the right to stay alive, protect yourself and those around you. I don't see how that's negotiable. But in terms of meeting in the middle, we've been doing that for 100 years, and all the meeting we've been doing has been in the pursuit of reducing our rights. So starting in the 30s when they said you can own this kind of firearm, then the 68 Gun Control Act, which is the result of Black people exercising their rights in California, then everything that's come from that, the quote assault weapon ban, it's always been moving more and more towards the elimination of rights, just as so many other issues. Now we see the elimination of free speech. We see the elimination of the free transfer of information because it's called misinformation or it's the result of right-wing terrorists. It's all designed to completely control people. The Second Amendment is interesting in this battle because everybody who wants to, the people who want to control everybody else, see the Second Amendment as the one thing that stands in their way. Because once people have the ability to protect themselves, then it's harder for tyranny to roll over you. But in the end, what I have found after many years of this is that there are a group of people. I mean, I got an email yesterday or the day before, very, very angry woman, furious that we were opposing this in court, and it's nasty, acerbic, and what am I going to tell my grandchildren? And so I wrote back in the same tone, and she was like, "Well, wait a minute. I just wanted to have a conversation." I said, "Okay, if you want to have a conversation, then approach me with an honest, serious question, and I will respond to it with a serious answer." So my question to you is, why are you willing to shut down the lives and livelihoods of so many people you never heard of? And her response, unbelievably, was, "Well, wait a minute. Why is this bad for jobs? Isn't there going to be a lot more paperwork? So aren't there going to have to be people filling out that paperwork?" So, well, yeah, those are state employees. They'll do fine. The people who run these businesses will not. There will always be people who are open to a civil conversation. Unfortunately, in this case, as is the case with the crushing of the First Amendment, as is the case with people trying to control your ability to travel, your ability to do business, your ability to associate with whom you want to associate with, these are not people who are simply misguided. These are people who have an agenda, completely manipulate. And I mean, you have groups that are saying openly, you will own nothing and you will be happy. And you've got people saying, we don't want you to drive a car. We don't want you to be able to build. So at the same time, we're saying we have a housing crisis. They do everything in their power to prevent new houses from being built or prevent a landlord from collecting rents so that he goes out of business and then the state can move in and take over his property. So I think there's always going to be people who want to have that conversation, and I'm certainly willing to have it. But I do think that the powerful forces, the Bloombergs, for example, Bloomberg's not a stupid man. He's a billionaire. He got that money because he knew he was smart. But he instituted rules in New York that targeted Black men who'd done nothing wrong to be stopped and searched in violation of every constitutional principle we believe in. And he was able to implement that because he's wealthy, while he violated the law by traveling to Bermuda, where his mansion is, with armed New York City police in violation of Bermuda law. So those people honestly believe that they have a different set of rules that are applying to them. And I don't think they can be reasoned with because they're not reasonable people. We'll always reach out to people. I believe you and I both spoke to a pastor who was hoping to have this conversation. But the reality is that the people in those churches in Portland, they never had a conversation with us. Floyd Przanski's not interested in conversation. Tina Kotek is certainly not interested in conversation. And all of the legislators who tacitly or openly agreed with this are not interested in having a conversation because they view people who own firearms as de facto terrorists. That is how they look at it. Only their private army should have the ability to take any action to stop violence. And their private army is gone. The police are not responding anymore. To recognize that is to admit you made a mistake, and they're not going to do that.
And I think that a lot of people have a hard time, quantifying that, this is not conspiracy, but, Portland and Oregon and certain states and cities, they make a lot of money off of chaos. Portland makes a lot of money off of the homeless crisis. They make a lot of money off of services and outreach, and the people that are of an elite status, people that are at the helm of some of these nonprofit organizations. There is a ton of money to be made if you are advocating for or you're working with some of these disenfranchised groups. And having people that are aware and awake of some of the situations that are going on in some of these cities, specifically if it comes to people being able to protect themselves, it takes away a lot of the need for some of these services. And I think that most people just do not want to dive into, the the layers that are surrounding situations like anti-gun control. I try to have these conversations with my wife, and when I talk about some of the things that precede anti-gun legislation and why they would look to disarm people, it's just too much for her to even think about. And I think that's the average voter. They don't want to think about the business side of gun sales. They don't want to think about the business side of, training, firearms training facilities, or places where people go to shoot, gun ranges, things like that. There's so much more to this than just taking away the big scary gun that you personally don't like.
Oh,
You know,
but
you
but not only that, you talk about the business side, and you just touched on it. All these quote victims advocates, that's great business, as you just pointed out. This is entrepreneurial victimhood. So for years, we faced people coming into the legislature saying, we need to take guns away from people to protect victims of domestic violence. Well, of course, this measure exposes victims of domestic violence, because if they attempt to protect themselves, their home addresses are going to be in a published database. But on top of that, every one of their efforts to protect victims of domestic violence all involve them getting money. And
right.
when we came along and said, well, you know what my organization has done, has given free firearm safety training to victims of domestic violence all over the state. And what we're saying to people is, yeah, you can get all the protective orders and restraining orders and pieces of paper you want. That ain't protecting you. Their ability to protect themselves, however, when we sat down and talked to women's groups in their shelters, which, let me tell you, that's quite a trip even getting in there, and said, how about we offer these people the ability to actually protect themselves? They don't want to hear about it, because what if they could? What if a victim of domestic violence was not dependent on them for their safety? Then there go the grants and there go the money. And I'm not saying that they don't have a purpose and do great things, but they should be doing it in conjunction with the people who are going to say, for that woman who can't get into your shelter, for that woman who only has a piece of paper, how about we give her and her kids a little bit of hope that they're going to be able to survive until the police who aren't responding finally get there. They don't want to hear about it because it just cuts into their cash flow.
Well, we've got the links to your organization. We have links to the legal fund. We've hit on people being more aware and more in tune in terms of turning the television on. I get it. The mainstream media news, what's being broadcast in terms of what we're seeing on a daily basis. It's not something that a lot of people want to bring into their homes, but we're seeing the repercussions of people not being aware and not being abreast to what's going on specifically within their states and their cities. Is there anything that we can do to help support some of these gun stores? You've been talking to gun store owners. You've been talking to people who work at some of these gun stores. What can we do as citizens to help support some of these businesses until we can get some injunction or some sort of legal ramifications in terms of help for Measure 114?
Well, this sounds like really odd, but the one thing I think won't help is trying to buy a gun, because you won't be able to get it because there's 22,000 people waiting in the queue. And what the gun stores are afraid of now is that when a gun is purchased, that they're not allowed to transfer. When that person can't get the gun ultimately, then they have to give the money back. What you could do is go into a gun store and buy something that's not regulated. They'd probably be very happy with that. And obviously they sell other things, so I would do that. But that's the problem that they're facing now, is that there's been a big surge of people trying to purchase guns. The state police are not approving the purchases or even initiating the background checks. Over 22,000 people are waiting. They're not issuing official delays. So what protections people would have in terms of transfers after 3 days, which is legal on a delay, those delays aren't even official, they're just automated. So I don't really see, other than buying stuff that is not a firearm. I mean, maybe go buy some magazines if you can find them. But right now, even attempting to buy a gun could wind up being a liability for these people, because when ultimately the transfer is forbidden, then they have to repay all that money, and I think that's going to be really crushing.
I can't even believe, as a veteran and someone who served this country, someone who spent so much time. I've spent about $10,000 over the past 2 years to train and be, just modestly proficient with a firearm. I cannot believe that we're in this day and age where we're even having this conversation. I don't recognize the country anymore, and it's very disappointing. But Not to be defeated. We will continue to push. We will continue to carry on. You're doing great work out here, Kevin, and I'm here to support you in any way possible. And hopefully, people that are watching this, guys, listen, you have to get involved. What is getting involved? Getting involved, talking to your local representatives, reaching out to your mayor, reaching out to your city council. Start small, start right in your area. Talk to your city councilman, talk to your mayor, talk to your state representatives, email them, call them. It takes very, very little time to just send a message and explain how you view this, how you feel about this. Also, supporting those gun stores. If you have a local gun store that you've done a lot of work with, during this trying time, go in there, purchase magazines, purchase ammunition, purchase anything and everything that you can to help keep these people in business. This is of no fault of their own. And then lastly, you have to get involved in terms of being an advocate for the Second Amendment. Every single person that you come in contact with, every single person in your family, that's a touch point. Have these conversations. I know that over the last 2.5 years, the last 4 years, it's been very, very difficult at that dinner table to have conversations, people having conflicting political views. But we have to start having these conversations and talking about the Second Amendment in practicality and how that applies to your family, how that applies to the people that you love, and why you take this so seriously. Having those conversations around the dinner table and talking to family members in a constructive way, it can sway people when these kind of things go to the ballot. And I think that we've maybe missed a lot of opportunities in the past, and we cannot afford to do that going forward, because Measure 114 is just the beginning, guys. This is a test run for what they're going to try and institute across the country. And, President Biden has been very adamant that he looks to ban the AR-15 and AR-15 variants. So we have to be involved. Kevin, I want to give you the last minute here of this broadcast. Anything that you would like to say, any places that you would like to push people towards in terms of your website or socials? And I turn this over to you.
Well, I would say that you just pretty much covered the most important things. Obviously, if people want to help us, our website is OregonFirearms.org. There are places there they can donate. The actual organization, we run 3 organizations, and the organizations actually paying the bills is the Oregon Firearms Educational Foundation, and donations to that are tax deductible. So that's very important. That's something that people can do. But aside from that, everything that you said is so important, that people really start paying attention and recognize that this is a very, very dangerous thing, and it is going to spread, and it is going to hurt people. And so I would like to close with one thing. Since this started, we've had an enormous outpouring of support from all over the country. And today, right now, is the day before Thanksgiving, and I'm telling you, tomorrow we'll be working. But I am so very deeply grateful for everybody who's helped us in every way. Some people in ways that I can't even calculate. So I really did want to say that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one positive thing from all of this, the creation of a much larger, more aware, and more vocal gun owner demographic here in Oregon. The people that I saw, I went to Keith's Sporting Goods here in Gresham 3 times last week. And each time the lines were bigger and bigger, and the conversations that were being had within that store while people were looking to purchase their firearm or pick up a firearm or just support that gun store, the conversations that I was hearing, it was amazing. And, it made me tear up, because so many people were waking up, and so many people who had even vocalized their unwillingness to get involved in the conversation, to be politically active, to even vote. A lot of them were saying, how this was a pivotal point, and it was a pivot point for them to get involved, and they were talking to their family, and they were there, and they were advocating for the Second Amendment. So I think that this is going to ultimately be a great thing for Oregon in terms of getting a voting bloc of gun owners more vocal and more out in front of things like this in the future. So that's my hope, and it's something that I'm very grateful for to have witnessed over the last 2 weeks. And again, Kevin, thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for coming on today. And as always, if I can be of any help, you know where you can find me.
I'll call you. Thank you, David.
Excellent.